Hello, all you happy innovators out there. Are you having a good week? You know, I hope that you're having a great week because you deserve to have a great week. I'm going to continue today with the fame discussion. I think it's time to start wrapping it up. So today will be one of the last in that series that I started a few months back. And before I start talking about all that stuff today, I want to express my gratitude to one of my listeners. I'll call him Grebo, okay? And he has been commenting on my SnowFlake episodes for quite some time now. And I appreciate that, okay? So I want to say thank you to Grebo, a special thank you, because this episode of SnowFlake 33 that you're listening to right now probably would not have happened if I hadn't gotten those comments from Grebo. And basically, you know, with the last episode that I released last week, he was kind of expressing to me that he felt a little let down that I wasn't going to give some of the stories about the Mort Band. So, what I've decided that I will do is I will give you a few stories about the Mort Band. I didn't really want to do that, okay? I'm doing this one for Grebo, okay? As a testimony to my gratitude for Grebo's engagement with SnowFlake 33 and everything, okay? And I also want to say just a really quick shout out to my nephew, David, who has been listening to these SnowFlake episodes, and he particularly liked the episode about my brother Steve and the People's Art exhibit because he was just a little guy when that whole thing shook down. If you go back to that episode, I was babysitting him when we saw my brother on the television. And, you know, I gotta say, when I was very young, I spent quite a bit of time with my nieces and nephews, babysitting them and, you know, taking care of them, even when they were infants. And I have to say that with my nephew, David, I kind of feel like he's my son. I played a large part in the raising of him and his younger brother Christopher and his older sister Megan. And I love them as if they were my own children. And it just really meant a lot to me that he was listening. You know, it makes a big difference to me to know that he gets it and he's laughing right along with me. So now that I've gotten all of that stuff out of the way, I'm going to continue with the Mort discussion, and I'm going to tell you some stories about that band situation, okay? And I have to kind of say it was really making me laugh to myself that I really had a hard time remembering good things. I really just had a hard time remembering positive things. But I had no problem coming up with, you know, negative stories. Loads of those. But in all honesty, that's not really fair because there was a lot of good times, obviously. I stayed in the band for 5 years, so it took me a little while to come up with a couple, but, you know, it probably shouldn't have, okay? But I guess, you know, to continue with the story, I think it wouldn't really be fair either if I didn't mention at least that there was, you know, kind of a revolving door of musicians that were coming in and out of the band for quite some time. And the core members were Mort and myself, okay? And so when I when I remember the band and when I think about it, if I go back to the beginning, what I remember is that just around the same time that I was getting ready to start jamming with Mort, there was a strange kind of thing that was going on in Cleveland, okay, about him that I took note of. Okay, like, I'll try to put this as delicately as possible. Mort seemed to have a bad reputation, okay? That there were a group of people in the city of Cleveland that were musicians that resented him, and they were kind of, at least from my best estimation, they were fabricating stories about him just prior to my joining the band. And I think that a lot of it had to do with the fact that his band had been so successful, and these guys were just jealous. I mean, let's face it, everybody is working really hard for this thing, you know, the brass ring, the record deal, you know? And here this guy comes along with his band, and they actually achieve it. And I feel, having lived through this whole experience and looking back on it now, of course, you know, I once heard a wise man say that, you know, you go through an experience in your life, and it really isn't until maybe like 20 years later when you look back on it that you really know where you were. Okay? And this is one of those circumstances, definitely, because I remember hearing all these stories about him and how dysfunctional he was, and he was a mess, and all this kind of stuff. And I kind of sensed that it was not true, that it was just a lot of BS, because in that city in particular, I would have to say there's so much backbiting. You know, we hate it when our friends become successful, right? It's a fact, okay? And I think that he was a victim of that, okay? I don't think he had done anything wrong to anybody, but they just were jealous, and he was down. You know, his band had gotten dropped from their label, and it was kind of like, you know, what goes up must come down. But when he was up, everybody was kind of like his best friend. You know, you couldn't get close enough to him, right? And when they came down, you know, when the band finally got dropped from MCA, they abandoned them. I mean, they jumped off like rats off of a sinking ship. You know, the audience is fickle, and they don't really care about him, okay? And when there was nothing that they could take from him, they discarded him like so much trash, okay? So I kind of sensed that was happening, you know, hearing these stories about him that were so inflated and so sensational, and he was just such a mess, and he was letting everybody down around him. I'm serious. These are the kind of rumors that I was hearing. And like I said, I kind of sensed it was not true. And of course it wasn't. Okay? Of course it wasn't. And I was willing to jam with him anyway, you know, because I knew that they were just being jealous. And I knew that he must be really good if they're getting this worked up about him, you know? So I remember that. Okay, I remember that very clearly. And that sense of apprehension, like, okay, I want to make sure that I'm hooking up with somebody who's what I think they are. And he was. I mean, come on. The guy was great. The guy was super talented. Okay? And, but the weird thing was that when I first started to jam with him, I had a really good reputation as a drummer. Okay? And when him and I first started to get together, there was this sense of like respect that he gave me. Okay? Because he didn't really know me that well. And, you know, we were still strangers. And I have to say that I do feel, in hindsight, that once we kind of started to get to know each other a little bit, I don't think he liked me too much. Okay? Which is kind of funny to even think about, but I think it's true, even from the very beginning. As soon as we got past the honeymoon phase, you know, the first impressions, and we started to work together, I kind of sensed that I wasn't one of his favorite people to hang around. And I understood why. You know, he was kind of like a party guy. He was a little more bacchanalian and a little more bohemian than I was. And not that I was ultra conservative, I just wasn't that into the party. Okay? And I do feel that kind of like what happened was when I joined the band, he saw a light of hope, you know, that someone had faith in him again. And of course I did. You know, he was good. And I was somebody who, you know, could potentially help him get out of this, well, let's call it a rut that he was in after they were dropped from MCA Records. And I remember distinctly when we first got together that he had like this band of guys around him that were, you know, playing music with him under a different band name. And they were all kind of like, at least my first impressions were like, that they weren't quite good enough to be playing with him. That he was working with musicians that were kind of like of a lower standard than he deserved. Okay? Does that sound bad? I guess it might, but you know, it's just a fact. You know, some guys have it and some guys don't, and these guys that he was jamming with, they really didn't have it, in my opinion. And he needed to get some guys that were a little stronger, you know, stronger players. And that is exactly what happened. You know, right out of the gate with the band, you know, he changed the name to the More Band, you know, and all these other guys were gone. We started to get some real players in there. And once that happened, you know, we were rolling. And we got into the studio and we recorded our debut CD, and I think it could have come out a little bit better. I think that we went into the studio maybe a little too soon after we had initially gotten together, and I think we should have waited a little bit longer. But it didn't really matter because the songs were there. It was a great demo, and we recorded it at Mars Recording Studio, which was great. I think our performance as a band could have been better. But anyway, but now having explained that, you know, we had recorded that first CD, it was kind of like we hit the ground running as a band right away. I mean, we were playing gigs all the time. We had started to establish a fan base. We were playing pretty good sized shows. And there were some member changes along the way. Like I said, it was like a revolving door. And eventually we had a guy join the band who played bass guitar. And actually, he was somebody that I knew from my days in Thumper. He was in a band that played around the same time Thumper did. We did a lot of shows together, and, you know, it was kind of like nice to see him again because I hadn't seen him in years, probably like, you know, 5 years or something. So it was kind of cool. It was almost like, I know that guy. Yeah, tell him to come down. Let's like jam. Let's do it. And he was a phenomenal player, and he was a phenomenal writer. Okay. He was a really creative guy, really kind of easygoing guy. He was a bartender, you know, that's what he did for a living, and he just was good at talking to people, and he treated people well. and he was a fantastic player. I mean, he wrote as well as he played, and he was dedicated and serious about it. And I think that Mort liked it a lot because now he had somebody to kind of like party with. And I didn't realize it at the time. It was kind of like the beginning of a separation that would start to take place, and a polarization really in the band, where I was, I wasn't a fuddy-duddy, okay? I mean, I can have a good time, okay? I just don't want to do it all the time. I can't do it all the time. I have to work, okay? I have to work, and I have to do all this other stuff, and, I can't be partying all the time. I can't be hungover at work, So that was kind of like a very important part of the story, especially when it comes to the end of the band, because really pretty early on there was already this separation kind of starting to take place. And it started out small, but over time it gradually got bigger and bigger, until the point where it was like just outright disrespectful sometimes, and ridicule, for not being the party guy, like they were. And, I have to say honestly, okay, that it really did seem to me that, like, when I started to first jam with Mort, like, he was a little bit humbled, okay? And as soon as things started to roll again, and we started to get some traction, he kind of changed a little bit, and that humility was gone, and he kind of could see in the future that it was going to be, high times again, that the good times were coming again, and he was going to have a chance to get back a little bit of what he had lost. And let me tell you, if I had anything to do with that, I was more than happy to do it, because the people around him sucked, okay? They sucked, and they kicked him when he was down. I mean, and I'm the kind of guy who is all about, second chances and stuff like that. I mean, totally. I would be pleased to help him get back some of what he had lost, because he was good and he deserved it. And those people sucked, okay? They were just jealous. So, anyway. Anyway, continuing on with the story, I have to say that once we got that new bass player in, who will remain nameless, when he joined the band, he really kind of was the third member that we were missing. And we really started to gel as a band. And we had, like I mentioned, we had one CD behind us already, and we immediately started to write a new CD. And everybody in the band kind of had their place, all right? So, I certainly would have music ideas and guitar ideas, but they weren't really going to be used in this project. I was the drummer, and I wrote drum parts, okay? I worked very hard to be creative and try to write really good parts, and I think our bass player was kind of doing that as well. In fact, he was probably kind of the inspiration for that. Like, the writing of the material started to kind of change. Our sound started to change because he was a strong writer and Mort was a strong writer. And I like to consider myself a strong songwriter, especially on drums. I can be a creative drummer. Okay, and this was really when we started to hit our stride as a band, and our reputation started to grow, and more importantly, I really feel that we started to make the best music that we could make. And it's really true. That the music we were generating, the music that we were writing, was really, really strong. And with the first CD, prior to this bass player joining, the music that we made was really kind of like reminiscent of like Jethro Tull and acoustic folk-based kind of prog rock, Emerson, Lake and Palmer, that kind of sound. And it worked really well because Mort's songs were very reminiscent of those groups. He was influenced by them, and it was coming out in this new and fresh way. And but with this new bass player in the picture, things really started to go off into more of a prog rock direction, and more of a Pink Floyd kind of thing, not so much a King Crimson thing anymore. Like more Floyd than King Crimson. And two very different bands, two very different sounding bands, two very different directions. And it was really kind of cool, some of the material that we were coming up with. It really was, pushing the limits, breaking away from conventional songwriting and going off into more of a progressive thing. And we wound up releasing an album, and the material on that album was really kind of fresh in a lot of ways, in my opinion. I mean, I really think like when I listen to it now, and I still do, I'm proud of a lot of what's on that record. I'm proud of a lot of it. But there are a couple of things that I just can't live with. A couple of mistakes I think we made. But I would have to say that it was kind of interesting, especially when I look back on it now, that a lot of this was fueled by that new bass player. I mean, as solid and as tight as Mort and I were, we weren't really a band until the bass player joined. It's kind of cool, actually, because it really kind of points to the fact that everybody in the band matters. Everybody had a role to play in the writing of the material. And this new guy, to the situation, was steering it. And it was all right. It worked. It sounded great. His ideas were really good, and he was a nice guy, and he was funny. He really was. One of the funnier people that I've jammed with. He just had a great sense of humor. And I miss him. I do. I gotta say, we had some good times. And I guess that's what I'll talk about right now, is some of the good times that we had. And one of them that comes to mind is one time we had done a show in Philadelphia, and it was a good show. We had played there before. It was a return trip, trying to make our way east. And what we decided to do while we were in Philly, after this show was done, was, I had bought a van, for the band, and a tour bus. I bought the tour bus, and we went out to Philly and we did this show, and then after that we decided we were gonna go to Atlantic City for a couple days. And when I look back on my tenure as the drummer in the Mort band, that was really one of the funner things that we did. It wasn't a show, we didn't go there to play a show. We just kind of went there because we could. It wasn't too far away. and it was fun. It was a lot of fun. We were right on the beach, the boardwalk of Atlantic City. We got a hotel room, a really big one, a decent sized hotel room. And we just kind of hung out as a band for a couple days, and it was just a lot of fun. And like I said a couple episodes back, one of the funnest things that a human being can do is tour with a rock band. It doesn't matter if you're playing stadiums or pubs. It doesn't matter. It's just a lot of fun to do. Okay? And I'm glad to say that I had the opportunity to do that. And that trip to Atlantic City stands out in my mind as one of the better times in the Mort Band. We had a really good time. Let me see. What else can I think of here? Okay, I have another good story about the Mort Band. Maybe about 2 years or 3 years into being in that band, there was a magazine in the city, and I guess like every year they would have like their version of like the Grammys, okay, which is ridiculous to which sounds ridiculous to even say, okay, but that's what it was, and we were nominated for like best band or something, and it wasn't a big deal. It was a small kind of situation. It was held at that club called the Odeon that Slow Bob had played our last show. They had the event at this club called the Odeon, and we went, and it was a lot of fun. I'll admit it. It was a lot of fun to be getting that kind of attention and all those kinds of things. It was a lot of fun. And right around that same time, which was also very cool, for the first time in a band that I was in, we made the cover of a magazine. And I thought that was really cool. It was a magazine called The Bottom Line, and they put us on the cover, and I was proud of that. It was definitely one of those things, that I won't soon forget. It was a big deal to me that we were doing that well and getting that kind of recognition. It was nice after years of, playing shows and being in bands. It was nice to finally be getting, some kind of recognition. I will admit it. Is it a big deal? Not really. But, it does speak to the whole fame thing a little bit now, doesn't it? I'm not sure how, but it does. But that was a big deal. And now, what I would say is, what do I remember? Okay, this is something that kind of stuck in my craw, something I never really forgot. We were in the studio recording the second CD, and I heard Mort having a conversation with the engineer, and they were talking about how songwriting credit is distributed as far as publishing is concerned, and money, making money off of songs. And the conversation was kind of going like this, like Mort was the songwriter. He would make the lion's share of the money because he was the primary songwriter. That was kind of the gist of this conversation. And the fact that I was only a drummer would not give me rights to any kind of songwriting credit. And when I heard that coming out of his mouth, okay, I was hurt. And a little pissed off, okay? Because I wrote those drum parts, okay? I wrote those. Those were mine, okay? And yeah, I wouldn't consider myself the songwriter, okay? But I was a primary songwriter. And I just remember that. How disappointed I felt that that was how he saw it. That I wasn't really a fully fledged participant in this project. And that was a turning point, okay? That was the first one. Or no, I wouldn't even say it was the first one. It was one of many, okay? But that was a bigger one. And then I would say ultimately, and this is probably really the reason why I quit the Mort Band eventually, okay? It became clear to me, like I explained to you a little while ago in this episode, that there was this separation that had begun as soon as that bass player had joined, that Mort now finally had somebody to party with, and I was kind of like looked down on because I wasn't a party boy, okay? I was a Puritan in his eyes, and I was insulted by that, and I think that's really how he intended it to go a lot of the time. It, like I said, it had kind of devolved into like a ridicule almost. And you know, he was 10 years older than me, okay? Almost to the day. We were 10 years apart from each other in age. And it was just kind of like an understanding that, you know, he's older and I'm younger. It's his band, you know, it's his baby, and I'm a visitor. Okay, I get that. Okay. But over time, the relationship gradually got more and more distant. And there was like a certain point in time when I realized that his loyalty to me did not exist. Okay? Why that is, I'll tell you why. And I think this is ultimately why. You know, I mentioned to you way back in the Slow Bob episodes that the city of Cleveland is really kind of divided east and west. Okay? And I was from the west side, you know, the have-nots. Okay? And Mort was from the east side, very much from the east side. Upper crust. Okay? Now, he would probably roll his eyes at that. Okay, and I kind of do too, because it's a little bit, you know, oversimplified. But I do feel that ultimately the separation between Mort and myself was really based on those kinds of things. That he kind of looked down on me because I came from the middle class. Okay? And whether or not that's true, I don't know for sure, but it's how I feel, okay? Because the tone of our relationship was like that. And basically, you know, what had happened was our bass player, I think, eventually quit. I don't remember exactly the circumstances. I can't believe it, but I don't remember exactly what happened, but I seem to remember that our bass player left and the band started to kind of fragment a little bit. And at that same time, I was working on my own stuff in the periphery, like when in my free time, and I was starting to fall in love with that process. I kind of felt like our crowd was starting to dip a little bit, and like I said, we were losing a band member for one reason or another, and there was like a whole lot of weird stuff going on at our rehearsal space. I remember that, and I remember a distinct feeling like band practice had become more of a social event than a band rehearsal. And there were a lot of people coming in regularly to our practices. And, you know, it wasn't like just a couple of people, you know, showing up at practice or whatever. It was like a lot of people. And our practices had become more of a social event than a band rehearsal. And I have to also say, too, that at this time I was kind of getting tired of the routine, you know. I was working full-time, and I lived in a really nice place. And I had a studio that I had built for myself, a small little studio in my apartment. And I would get off of work, and I would go to band practice, and it would kind of like leave this comfortable, happy existence that I had at home, and then go to band practice and, you know, screw around for 4 hours before we even got behind our instruments and started to play. And at each rehearsal, it just was like 4 hours of just wasting time when I could have been at home doing a lot more and getting a lot done and actually being happy and comfortable, you know. And that's okay some of the time, but it was happening every time. And I really kind of started to resent that the party had gotten so out of control that it wouldn't end. Although I can say in the time before I really started to consider leaving the band, and in the time before our bass player had left, we had written and recorded, I think, almost a complete album of material. And it was really, really good. It was better than anything else we had done. And I remember after our bass player quit the band, you know, Mort started to like audition bass players, and you know, I wasn't really happy with the people that he was bringing in. And that wasn't a reason to quit, but it was really kind of a signal to me that, you know, this is reaching an end point, you know. Although I am proud of those final songs that we did for that final CD. I'm not even sure how many of them got released to the public, but I did record a full album with him and the bass player. We did record a full third album. I'm not sure what happened to it, and I guess ultimately it doesn't really matter. But that was it. You know, and also too, okay, I remember this now that I'm thinking about it. There were a lot of people coming around that were kind of like, you know, it's kind of like a symptom of your band doing well when you have people showing up that you don't know, and they're like, I can do this for you, I can do that for you, I have a record label, I want to sign you to my record label. And you know, I've just learned over the years that, you know, basically if a person comes up to you like that, if someone comes at you that way and they're not willing to put any money into what you're doing, they're full of crap, okay? And they are to be avoided. If they're asking you for money, it's a scam. If someone has power and the ability to do anything for your band and they come at you, they'll give you money, okay? And that wasn't happening. And there was a whole lot of that, you know, these dingleberries that were kind of, you know, showing up and offering us the world. And, you know, one of the major ending factors of this situation with me playing in the band was this stupid offer that we were given by this company to supposedly tour on a B stage with U2, that there was going to be a handful of unsigned bands that were going to be on a smaller B stage for the Elevation tour, okay? And that we were one of the bands that was going to be on this tour, and it was total BS, okay? And when that really stupid offer was given to us, I remember the bass player and I were both a little reluctant because we kind of sensed that it was BS, that it was a scam, and Mort was kind of egging us on, you know, pushing us to do it. And so we eventually agreed, but it was really odd, and we kind of knew that it was not real, and Mort was really trumpeting this idea like he really wanted to do it. Like we didn't really have a choice. Like it was his band, and you know, we were gonna do what he wanted to do. He thought it was a good idea. But what wound up happening because of this offer, and we had contracts that were signed, everybody was gearing up to do this thing, and it was a lie, okay? But people quit their jobs. People were, you know, ending the lease on their apartment because they were going to be gone. I mean, people were stopping their lives to go on this tour that was never going to happen. Of course, you know, we didn't really know that at the time, but that was the understanding, and that was really, whoa, you know? I mean, people's lives were ruined by this situation. Fortunately for me, that wasn't the case for me, but it was definitely a sign that this situation is really not good for me, okay? Not good for me, and it was time to exit. And I kind of felt that, like I really felt let down and disappointed by all of it, okay? And I guess the lesson to me was that the music can be great, okay? But personal relationships and how you're treated by your bandmates, by these people that you're investing your time and your dedication to, you know, those relationships matter almost more than the music does. And my heart was broken by this situation, particularly with Mort. You know, being in a band with someone is a lot like a marriage. And I can say that now with certainty because I've been married now for, you know, about 12 years. And with Mort, I can honestly say I had kind of resigned myself in the beginning, you know, when we first started to get rolling, that this was going to be the band for the rest of my life, okay? That no matter what happened, whatever he was singing or playing or whatever, I was going to be drumming behind it forever. I mean, I really felt that way. It was that good, and it was that real, and I was that serious about it, okay? But that ended, and I was wrong. And sometimes you think that somebody is your friend, and they're not. And I remember when I quit the band, I remember the sentiment. And I don't think that he was really disappointed or anything. He kind of tried to act like he was, but, I don't think he really cared. And this is where I'll end this story. So for now, this is Mike Bostwick from Pipe Choir Records signing off. And remember, folks, if you want to keep what you've got to give it away. Take it easy.